you deal a lot with improvised music and in trio formats, and not just straight up jazz. And could you talk about listening and how you interact with the soloist or who you listen to, that sort of thing?
I try to listen to everything that's happening. First of all, I hear the drums as one sound. I'm not thinking of it as four different things happening. I want to hear it mixed right here with my ears, how I want to hear it, and I'm thinking of getting inside of it and hearing it as one thing. So I want my kit to be balanced in the proper way, and I'll get to your question too, but I'm just thinking of what I'm listening to. Is that, and then the mix with the rest of the band, whatever it is, but if it's a trio, guitar, bass maybe, I'm certainly listening to it as one sound. Further than that, like everything is I'm focusing on how it sounds in a mix, like I'm listening to it on a CD or something. Does that make sense? And then as far as interacting, I might just wait until I hear something, a phrase, and I'll wait and hear some space. Like if Wayne plays some kind of rhythmic, something rhythmic, which he does a lot, so, some kind of rhythmic phrase, and then he stops, I might answer it, like a call and response. Or not necessarily, I wouldn't play what he played. I would try to play something that extended that phrase, further. Or I might just be locking in with some kind of groove that the bass player and I are doing. And, sometimes that's our role, is just to, like with Oz Noy in that trio format, I'm more or less keeping the groove for the most part, because it's more structured in his group, for him to solo over. And that's how he wants it to be. It's less interactive, so it's more a repetitive way of playing. So then in that context, I'm thinking of how I lock in with the bass player and find my moments that I can maybe make a statement, I don't want to step over something, but if I hear something, an answer to what someone might have played, then I might go for that, There again, thinking of those 8-bar phrases, or whatever it might be, because the form could be completely different, obviously. Thanks. That was a tune called Lucky Beard from this band I play in called Rudder. And it's on the new record called Matorning. And Rudder is actually myself, Tim LaFave on bass, Henry Hay on keyboards, and Chris Cheek on sax. This is our second record together. That tune incorporates using the rim for writing sound, and it's in 3. It's in a 3/4 kind of funk vibe. And then it also has, later in the tune, it superimposes, or it's a metric modulation using 4/3. It goes into 4 based on that for the keyboard solo, and then it goes back to where it started in 3 before the outro. So the basic groove for the tune is like so. And then the melody in the bridge section goes in, the sax is playing the 4/3. So if we're here, 2, 3, 2, the sax is going ba 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 dun 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 1, 2, 3 and we stay in 3, and then later in the tune we modulate to that and a break. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then to get back out of it. One, two, three, 2, 3. So you hear that. So that's kind of the fun part of the tune is using that as a little trick, but it works for the tune really well. The groove that goes to 4 is kind of a hip hop meets, maybe the Roots kind of vibe or something. I'm not sure what it is, but it kind of has a skippy kind of bass drum. The bass line is playing really, it's not exactly on the beat. Neither is, well, it is sometimes, but when you hear it, you'll see what I mean. Like they're both kind of playing with the time a lot. So I got to really hold it. And what I'm playing is this, basically.
You get a great sound out of all your drums, and I was just kind of wondering if there's a way you tune them, or if it's the way you hit them, or maybe even kind of the almost backwards angle you have on the drums.
Yeah, I it's a gradual thing that happened. I'll talk about the angles first and then get to the tuning. When I went to college and started at the University of North Texas, I studied with Ed Soph, amazing teacher, great school. It really opened me up to the jazz thing, which I didn't know a lot about at the time. So I was experimenting with different tunings, more of the bebop open tunings, you know, that you associate with that kind of music. And then using the more washy, big cymbals. You know, I just kind of started liking that sound. And then a lot of this, you know, the music I was listening to growing up, like Led Zeppelin, that has a really big bass drum sound. Bonham, you know, made that, one of the guys that made that famous, you know. And just the open tuning in Jimi Hendrix music or any rock music or soul music that was using open sounds. I really liked that sound. So I just kind of put it all together in a way that made sense to me. I experimented with my seat height. So I think because I sit, I think, relatively high compared to a lot of people, it kind of gives me the sensation of sitting over the drums. You know, I'm the king of this domain right here. You know, I'm looking down. You know, I'm in control here. So, you know, versus sitting low and maybe things are angled at me in this way, I'm sitting high, so everything is more facing me, so to speak. Because I play traditional grip most of the time, this angle began to make more sense for me. I'm not the only one that's ever done it. You know, it's been
I've
done.
definitely seen it on the snare before.
Yeah.
A lot.
But it kind of gradually started to happen, and I feel like I can get, you know, because of the angle that I play coming here, I think it allows me to get the grace notes and the bounces much easier, which I think it gives it a better sound, and I can control the rim shots better with this angle. So it only made sense to me to have floor toms exactly the same, because why should it change? You know, they're the same level. So that just kind of felt right to me. And like I say, I'm sitting high. I like the toms to be as low as possible. So it made the most sense to have them more or less flat, you know. And the way that I play, the motion is this way. So all this stuff is personal, and there's no rules here. I just came up with something that worked for me. Most people think I'm crazy, you know, but I, you know, you just do whatever you got to do to make it comfortable for you as a player, and this is what I've come up with so far. And then having the cymbals low, where I'm not reaching for anything. I shouldn't have to stretch myself, you know. It shouldn't make it more difficult than it already is. So, so everything is just in a place where it's comfortable. And I do feel like I get a better bounce probably because of the technique that I have and the way at which I come at, you know, the motion that I have coming this way. So I get a better bounce, which I think allows me to draw the sound out, and I think it helps with the sound as well. That's my goal anyway. And because of that kind of bebop period or you know, jazz studies that I went through in school, I started experimenting with the open bass drum, meaning the open tuning, with no muffling at all. Usually a bebop kit's going to be tuned a lot higher than this, you know, but it's the same concept really. So I just kind of tuned it down to more of something that sounds a little rock, you know, heavier. And same with the toms. Instead of having them really high and bebop sounding, I just let them come down in pitch. Tension is comfortable for me to get a nice bounce. You know, it's not loose to where it's a thuddy kind of vibe. It still has the resonance, and so I just kind of went with that. And the only thing I really changed from this is when I do gigs that this bass drum would just not work for this type of tuning. Obviously, it's not going to work for everything. So I'll use a 22. This is a 20. I'll use a 22 on the bigger tours that I do, you know, to get a more solid sound. And of course, I have it muffled quite a bit. So I just found it fun to use both, you know, switch it out. But I keep the toms pretty resonant all the time as much as I can, you know, and just kind of became what I hear, what I want to hear when I play. I want to hear a lot of resonance, a lot of overtones. And I think drums should ring. I think that's what they're meant to do, you know. We don't put pillows in our toms or our snare drums.
People get used to that at home, trying to keep them quiet. You know?
Yeah, and it works. I mean, it really does sound great. I mean, I'm a fan of both, you know, and it's a studio trick, and it really makes a lot of sense. You get a lot more bottom end when it's tight. You know, if you want the tight sound, you know, to put the blankets in or the pillows or whatever you need to do, it's great for a lot of context, a lot of different music that require that, you know. And the technique is different too, you know. Yeah.
Do you kind of going with that? Do you have to adjust the way your drums sound depending on who you're working for? I guess like what artists you decide to play, you're playing for, whether it be Steely Dan you might want a different sound than James Taylor or whoever. Do you have to adjust? Whether all right, I don't. Then will they come to you and say I don't want that much resonance? I want it to be
Yeah, it has happened. What I normally go in with is the 22 bass drum for tours like that. 22-inch bass drum, muffled pretty well, that I think sounds good for the music. And like I said, I usually keep the toms resonant, but there's been times where it didn't work for a certain room or a certain hall where we had to, either muffle things up a little bit, or I'll change the tuning if I need to. But for the most part, I try to go for this sound with either it's an open kick or a really muffled kick. I think it works together okay.
It's definitely your voice.
Well, that's what I'm kind of going for anyway.
Keith,
Yeah.
what kind of head combinations do you use?
I use all Remo coated ambassadors on the top, everything except for the bass drum. And I use clear diplomats on the bottom, so they're really thin. And I just found that I get a lot more resonance that way. And the bass drum, I use a Power Stroke 3 Remo, clear.
Coated or clear?
Clear. Sometimes if I want more resonance with the open kick, I'll cut out the ring. If I want it to ring a little more. Some of the heads come with a little strip around. That's one thing. You can cut out some of it or you can cut out all of it, depending on what you're going for. But sometimes it's great to have that. I like both, depending on the room or whatever. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the sound of your rim shot, and I guess how you kind of developed its consistency and just what your thinking behind that was.
Well, I use a rim shot for every backbeat. If it's, I would say 90% of the time, I use the rim shot, meaning this type of rim shot. Some people call that a rim shot, so just making sure. Or, side stick, same thing. But I use it just to get the power out of it. And because I do so many grace notes, it helps to have the volume difference, so that I think my grace notes can be pretty high sometimes. So I think sonically it made sense to have that really powerful, accent or 2 and 4, whatever it is, sound. So I just worked on it and trying to always nail it in the same spot, over and over and over. And that just comes from the motion. It comes from years of doing it too. But that accent gives me the momentum, to catch the bounce and play the grace notes as well. So I use that as a way to give me that momentum,
I also noticed that your right hand, depending, I guess, on how loud you're playing, do you move it, I guess, in order to get your stick that high, if you want to keep the hi-hat notes a little lower, or do you kind of move it around, or what's your thinking behind that?
Yeah, exactly. I think it depends on what I'm playing. Sometimes if the right hand is a little more of a busy pattern that I need to keep there, you know, if it's a 16-note kind of pattern, or depending on what it is, I will move it over so that this is free to just kind of do its thing. Otherwise, I'm doing this to allow it to happen, and it gets in the way sometimes. So I do what I got to do depending on what it is I'm playing. Yeah.
What did you work on to develop the ability to keep constant grace notes in your left hand while playing a whole bunch of stuff?
Well, I have a background in rudimental, you know, marching percussion, and I was in the marching bands throughout school and all the way through college, actually. So I was always in drum lines, and just a lot of exercises you do in marching band requires, you know, working on keeping both sides really strong. You know, you don't want to have a weak hand. So it's kind of like whatever you do with this hand, you want this hand to be able to do. You know, you want to keep them even in strength and what you can execute. So I would just do a lot of singles and double exercises and just the basic rudiments, really. And just work on using more finger strokes instead of wrist, because I found that was holding me back, you know. So I just figured out a way to basically twitch the fingers, you know, bouncing the stick, or just doing whatever I have to do to get it out. I just came up with a way for that to happen easier, you know. But when I get to my hand technique, I can explain that further. Yeah?
Could you talk about the songwriting process you go through with Rudder?
Yeah, we do a lot of jamming, and those things will turn into songs or tunes, you know. And then also Chris brings in stuff that he writes, as well as Henry and Tim. And I bring in grooves that I think of, or, you know, things like that. At least so far, that's kind of how it's worked. But a lot of it's just jamming. There's a tune I'm going to play later that just ended up on the new record, but it was just basically a sound check as we were getting sounds in the room, the studio. And it just was one of those things where they were rolling tape. We didn't know it, and it turned out cool, you know. It turned out sometimes when you least expect things to happen, they do, or when you know if you think you're not being recorded. But yeah, it's just, yeah, like that, just different ways it happens.
With Rudder, does everything come in long flows, or is it pieces like, oh, that piece sounds good and this piece sounds good, trying to put that together, or is it just a strict flow with the jam?
I think it's more of a flow thing, yeah. And then if something sounds good, we'll remember that part, you know, and just come back to it, make that part of the tune. Make that maybe the theme or the head, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
That was also Rudder from our new CD called Matorning. And that tune is called Tokyo Chicken. I don't name these tunes. I approve them, but I don't name them. Anyway, that's just an example of a quirky, straight up and down eighth note groove. You know, it's kind of comical in a way. The tune is comical, so I'm playing it pretty comical. At least that's how I hear it. But it still should groove. But the things that I choose to play are very straight up and down and kind of retro in a way. It basically has an A section and a B section. The A section is just straight up and down. You know, I'm putting da-dum-dum at the front of the phrase just for something different. Da-dum-dum, 3, 4, 1, 2, dum-dum, da-dum-dum. So just to kind of make it a little different. And then a little fill that goes into the beat 2 in the bridge. Keeps it interesting. That happens every single time, so that there's some kind of, every time it happens, it's there. And then there's little breakbeat sections in between, and then it goes into this house groove at the end that just builds and gets crazier and crazier. So that was a tune that Henry brought in, the keyboard player, and it just turned into a nice little jam, but it has a quirky little melody and came out really cool. So there you go, straight up eighth note, kind of rock power groove thing. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could talk about how you developed, I guess, the coordination to play the overlapping grace notes with the bass drum notes, I guess, because I noticed a lot of them hit at the same time, but they're always perfectly together. So I was wondering if you could just talk about that.
I don't want them to sound like flams, so I just consciously try to get everything to line up so that it sounds, perfectly together in the flow of the 16th notes. It's all 16th notes. And a way that I might have kind of worked on that is just to sit here and play eighth notes on the hi-hat, 16ths on the snare drum to make sure that those are cool, and then just play random figures, 16th note figures on the bass drum, and just make sure everything's kind of lined up. That's one way to do it, I think. It's not the most musical sounding thing, but this would at least help you hear if things are in the right place. Because a lot of times 16th notes are easily rushed, and you want to make sure you give the notes their proper value. Don't be in a hurry. So if it's like 1, 2, 3. I guess that sounds pretty horrible, but you see what I'm saying. Like, everything is, I'm thinking in terms of the 16th note subdivisions. They should just really all be lined up. And I'm playing rudiments between the bass drum and the left hand a lot of the times, if you break it down. So the right foot just kind of takes place of this, so the right hand, Anyway, so, some were taking place of the right hand, obviously, and some weren't. But The idea is that when I play certain patterns, I feel like it's taking over for this hand, and then this can just be free to play the eighth notes or 16ths for the flow. That's another rudder track that kind of just happened at sound check while we were getting sounds, and I just started playing this groove. Tim started playing this bass line, and we just started jamming, and the engineer was rolling tape, and we didn't even know it, and it just turned into a cool little groove and track, you know. And I think Chris later came on and added some sax stuff to make it sound more, you know, composed, and Henry added some keys later. So the vibe of it is, it's in 7/8, but it's kind of it's influenced a little bit by Second Line. You know, it's a little more tighter swing than maybe Second Line would be, but it kind of has that jumpy feel. And I'm just thinking of it kind of as like a 2/3 clave maybe pattern, where the, you know, would be 2/3, but I'm just going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, and then it changes grooves every now and then, goes up and down. But the basic pattern is this, really.
You do an excellent job at masking that 7. It doesn't even seem like it's 7. You know, there's certain tunes that have that feel, but you're doing a really great job. What's your approach to that? Are you trying to mask it, or are you just trying to play to the music?
I'm just playing the groove that I hear, but I think the idea of playing odd times, I don't do a lot of that, but when I do is for it to be, groovy enough that you're not really sure that it is odd, you know, because it has some kind of flow.
That's what I love, when you can mask it like that.
Yeah. There's a lot of ways you could do that. You know, you just don't want it to sound stiff and rigid, you know, like not accenting the 1 too much or too hard, or you know, you kind of want it to just seem light, you know, and easy, and don't play in so many blocks. You know, I think playing in bigger phrases helps, because it's not like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You know, I'm not thinking that at all. I'm just thinking more like deck and get, deck and get, deck and that, deck and that, at least 2 bars, you know. But you could think even broader than that. Or just thinking in 8th notes could help too. It just continues. So, but yeah, and I guess just playing it consistently, and just like you would in 4, it should have that same momentum and flow and forward motion, balance of the kit and everything. Thanks. That was another Oz Noy tune with Will Lee playing bass, and it's called Ice Pick. And that's an example of kind of a pretty tight swung, groove tune, as opposed to the other one I did that was, straight up and down, eighth notes. So this is a pretty tight swing, and I just approach it pretty much a groove tune throughout. I mean, there's some accents. The riff has the end of one happening, as well as the melody happens a lot. So I kind of choose to play that most of the time, sometimes not. But even in the solo section, I'm not really interacting with the guitar. I'm just holding the groove with Will, and that works for that tune. So it's just another way of just approaching instrumental music, just keeping it groove and playing where it's appropriate.
Keith, I noticed on this tune, your bass drum technique changed. It was more like on the first couple songs, you were letting the beater come off the drum and the drum be resonant. Now it's more like you're burying the beater into the drum. Is this due to the bass drum that has changed, or is it the tuning, or the feel of the head now that's more dead?
Yeah, I think because it's more dead and it's definitely muffled, it kind of feels right to do that, because that's how I always used to play. And I learned how to pull it off by playing the more open tuning bass drum. So now it depends on probably how hard I'm hitting. That since the track was pretty loud in my cans, so it makes you hit harder than maybe you normally would in this situation. At least it does for me. And so I was probably just kind of digging in more, because it's a different response. Obviously, there's no real vibrations, so it feels like you're hitting a table, So I think that's just my way of trying to dig into it, but it's not really necessary.
Do you feel it grounds you more, like in the time? Like I notice when I play a more dead bass drum, it helps me ground into the time of the song.
Yeah, I think it there's some of that, and it's just being able to do both. Whatever. I think you're right, but I think even on a bass drum like this, if I'm playing a little more relaxed, it's cool to do either one. To be able to do both, because it keeps you more relaxed. You're not, because when you dig in, it tends to tighten up your leg, So just playing and then relaxing is something to really think about. But I don't always do it. But say, if I played the same groove, just a little lighter and more relaxed. See, that probably even would feel better with the track. But because I had it so loud, it made me want to compete with what I was hearing in my head. It's an illusion.
Do you find that happens on stage too?
It can, yeah. And then I have to tell myself to just let the mics do the work, But it's just an illusion when you have all that sound happening. It makes you kind of feel like you got to compete with that,
Yeah.
It's strange. So I'm always thinking about that stuff and trying to learn how to adjust mentally and physically. Remember that you don't have to hit so hard, because the drums are going to sound better, and because they're not going to choke. And when you're mic'd up, let the mics do the work,
Right.
What I could have done is I could have turned my cans down, gotten a better mix, and we're kind of rushing through this today, so it's like you forget certain things, But if I were to do it again, I'd probably start over, slow down, make sure everything's right, where I feel more relaxed, because it makes you play better.
Yeah.
Good question. Yeah.
You had mentioned your rock background a couple times. What were some of your major rock influences when you were younger?
Wow, I guess everything from The Who to the Beatles to, you know, more harder stuff, even Kiss, Zeppelin, some of the more progressive stuff, Rush and Yes and Kansas, and which that kind of led me to want to check out, you know, more fusion sounding music and other things, and it just kind of broadened me more.
What do you have on now? What do you listen to now?
I kind of just go back and listen to what I liked when I was growing up. A lot of a lot of soul music and you know, I never get sick of the Beatles. I never get sick of Stevie Wonder or Al Green, or great songwriting. You know, it doesn't really have to be about the drums per se being the dominant. You know, razzmatazz. If it's a great groove played well.
Could you talk about how you approach a more straight up gig like the one you play with Steely Dan, and maybe demonstrate some of the grooves you have to play with them?
Well, the two records that I worked with them on was Two Against Nature, which I played on that cut, and then the title cut, and Everything Must Go. I played on that entire record, and I could just demonstrate some of those grooves that I played that I get asked about a lot in clinics. One of them is on Everything Must Go, first cut, I believe, called The Last Mall. It's a blues shuffle, and I didn't necessarily want to try doing something like the Bernard Purdie shuffle or something that, because it was a little too fast for that, you know, to have that kind of a vibe for it. And I think I just wanted to find something a little different that would work. I remember Walter suggesting the Four on the Floor, because he was playing bass on that record. And so that ended up working out great. And so I just put the shuffle in the hi-hat and tried something. And when I found this, Donald and Walter seemed to really like where it was going. So this is how it kind of ended up. I just kind of put the shuffle pattern by playing more or less a triplet feel on the hi-hat. I just put the accents in there to kind of give it that with the bass drum. And it worked great for the tune, for that tempo. And at the very end, when I played the other pattern, when I went to the snare drum, I played that kind of a groove, which basically the right hand stays the same. I played that groove on the bridge and I think the solo section. So it went back and forth in between those two feels. Another one that we actually still play live quite a bit is called Godwhacker. And it's more of a 16th feel. It's in the hi-hat, it's an 8th, 2/16ths kind of da 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 feel throughout, and the bass line was dun da dun dun da dun dun da dun 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 like that, and so I just kind of went along with that, and this is what we came up with. and that's a tune we play a lot on the last tours I've done anyway. And it's more or less kind of, I'm accenting the quarter note instead of a lot of their tunes. A lot of my favorite ones to play have the upbeat kind of the upbeat hi-hat happening in the grooves, whether it's 16th or 8th notes. And this one is more like, which kind of works for that tune. One other one, while I'm at it, is the title cut from Two Against Nature, called Two Against Nature. And the way this one came about, this was the only tune that I've ever done with them where I played by myself with something they already had sequenced, programmed. And I played along to this conga and hand clap that was happening in the track, along with, I think, a bass line that was sequenced that I guess was later replaced. So I just basically played along to a sequenced drum percussion track, And this is kind of what I'm going to do now is more how we play it live. We played it live a couple of tours now. And so I'm emulating the hand claps, which happen, this tune is actually in 6/8 or in 3, depending on how you hear it. The tempo, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1, and 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I just put that in the snare drum, basically. And again, I remember Walter kind of liking kind of a samba pattern in the feet. So I'm playing a samba in 3 on the feet, and then I'm on the ride cymbal. It's just kind of improvised bell stuff with those accents in mind. So this is what it ended up sounding like. And then when I go into the chorus, when I go to the hi-hat, that's kind of the chorus pattern. And it goes into more of a kind of a 3 kind of funk, with the bass drum pretty much staying in that same samba pattern. But this is Two Against Nature. Those are 3 tunes I get asked about quite a bit, and so that's the basic pattern. It's certainly more difficult to play without the tune happening, and but that's basically the vibe. I love playing all these classic tunes. I mean, they're timeless, classic recordings and songwriting and tunes, and what I try to do is really pay homage to what happened in the 70s, what they were doing, and I try to really get inside of what those drum parts are, because they're so important to the tunes. So I can't really stray from it too much. I just find places where I can do my thing. Obviously the subtleties and things are going to be different. Where I choose to play fills, or the fills that I do play, are probably going to be different. And if there's a feature where I play a solo, I'm going to do, what I want to do with that. So you find your places, but I really stick to the parts as much as I can because it's really so much a part of the music. So one of the things I like to play is the Bernard Purdie stuff. Like there's one called The Fez, which has an interesting upbeat groove. There's a couple that I'll show like that. That's kind of a cool, it's a great Bernard track, and huge fan of Bernard Purdie. And that's one of the ones that I recently played live on the last tour, and it's a lot of fun to play. And it's just one of those tunes that it probably wouldn't work in any other type of music, but a Steely Dan tune, you know, just the upbeat, you know. Some people might associate that with disco or something, but it's really timeless to me anyway. It's just perfect for the song, and it's the way he played it was great. So I just kind of play it in my own way. But another one of those is like Kid Charlemagne has the same kind of chugga chugga feel, but the open hi-hat before each backbeat, you know. Oh, and there's actually one more that comes to mind now that I'm thinking about it. That Keltner played in Josie. So it's another kind of upbeat, more lighter feel. What's interesting about it is the riff is one, so it's the two is really accented, and there's like a little pause in the groove. So the one, one, it's just so perfect for the tune, you know. How all these parts fit together is so cool.
Every drummer always talks about the Asia track with Steve Gadd and how he listened to it once and it was, you know, one take, he did it. How is your approach to that song?
Like most of the tunes, I try to get as close as I can to the spirit of the original recording as far as the parts, you know. So, you know, I play the body of the tune pretty close to how I hear the Steve played it. I mean, it's going to be different naturally because obviously, you know, my feel is naturally going to be different or whatever. But the parts and the spirit of it, you know, I think I try to connect with. And then when it comes to the vamp for the featured solo parts, I just kind of improvise around those.
Are there certain licks that Steve Gadd did that you try to really copy because it really stands out to you, or is it something you just go off the cuff and just play your own thing?
I generally just go off the cuff, and I mean, I wouldn't want to try to play what he played, you know. I mean, it was a classic take, and I just try to do something with it that I hope is somehow valid, you know. But I just improvise with it, you know, like earlier when I was playing along to when I was showing you the phrases, the 8-bar phrases, whatever. I'm just kind of hearing those and just playing around it. Those are 8-bar phrases. You know, that would be kind of a vibe.
Yeah.
You can't not go there, right?
Yeah, that's,
I mean, it's just classic.
that's one of the
I mean-
licks that you would try to copy.
So you know what I think when I say I connect with the spirit of it. I mean, Steve played a brilliant take. We all know that, and I wouldn't want to try to copy it. But I think he approached it as a groove in a way. I mean, there's some things thrown in there around the toms and, you know, certain signature fills that he does. But I hear it as he's playing grooves around, you know, those kicks and hitting some of them. You know, a lot of times he'll kick, you know, the beginning of the anticipation of each phrase, like 1, 2, 3, 4, gone. You know, that just kind of keeps, that's some kind of thing that's happening that keeps it connected with those
Right,
kicks. Things
grounds
like
it.
that work well. But I just try to play it differently every night and come up with something that works. And then going into the groove at the end is always really effective. How he kind of goes into the samba groove. I'll play a version of that, you know, to get out of it. You know, it's usually the last time through, because that's such a great way to end the solo and just groove it out. You know,
Right.
works perfectly. Yeah.
Are there any of the classic tracks that you feel like you kind of took and made your own? Like,
Well, I think in a way I do that just by knowing where to do that and where not to do that. You know, just subtle things happen, and I find where I can let some of my vocabulary work with what was already recorded, or subtle things, grace notes, fills that I choose to play are different than the recordings. You know, I don't want to just completely copy it. I don't think they would want me to. You know, they've been playing these songs a long time, as well as a lot of artists I've worked with. You know, they need something to keep them, you know, inspired too. You know,
you're keeping it interesting for them.
I'm trying to keep everyone interested. We all try to do that for each other, you know. And you know, if you're playing it exactly the same way every night, that would probably get a little boring for everybody, you know. So just having those little surprises in there, keep it fun. You know, as long as it's mature choices and it's not out of context or, you know, overplayed or something. Stay within the style and the attitude of the music.
When you're on tour, do you ever have to use charts when you're playing live? Do you ever have to use, you know, keep a chart on stage for, you know, whatever reason?
I have before. If it's a lot of music I had to learn quickly, and I might just have it for, you know, safety net, just in case. I might want to just have little notes about how something starts and ends, or little cues that I might want to remember. But if there's a lot of rehearsals, which usually there are, then I try to get away from it as soon as possible. I want to have it really well memorized, and so I'm not thinking too much on the shows, so I can really get inside the music, you know, and let things happen more freely.
Like, how do you prepare for these shows? Do you bury yourself with the charts and the music and the headphones, and is that how you
Yeah.
pretty much do it?
Yeah, I'm a fan, actually, so I know a lot of the music, and
Helps,
then,
right?
but But then when you really get inside of it, there's a lot of subtleties and details that you really find once you really get deep into it. And so I do study that, and just I try to know everything that could possibly come up. You know, I have all the records, I learn everything, and I'm ready for whatever's called at rehearsal, you know. Sometimes the arrangements might be a little different, so there's charts for that, or changes, or certain things that might happen. But generally, I try to get in there as prepared as possible.